All right, so we're going to get back into our discussion of English colonialism. We're in the Restoration colonies right now, those colonies that came about after the restoration of the King of England. And the next one I want to talk to you about is New Jersey. New Jersey is an outgrowth of Pennsylvania. It was, or it is a neighbor of Pennsylvania. And it gets its start as one of those proprietorships from the Duke of York, way back in 1664. But because of issues of land being used up, a shortage of good soil, particularly in Massachusetts, but throughout New England, a lot of Puritans are going to move into New Jersey as well. So you're going to have this clash of cultures where Puritans and Quakers are going to run into each other right here in this area. Eventually, New Jersey is going to kind of be dominated by the Quakers. It's going to take a while for it to happen. But by 1702, there is a separate colony. It's a separate proprietorship. It's become so successful that Pennsylvania can no longer dominate it. So we have the colony of New Jersey. You'll notice these restoration colonies are a whole lot simpler than the others. There's not as much in their history. Part of that is they came about so much later that the pattern is already there. Okay? So they're not going to make the same mistakes that were made in Virginia and Roanoke and Maryland and those areas. They're going to come right in and be able to show growth almost immediately. Y'all still writing? I'll give you a minute or so to finish writing and we'll move on. Y'all don't forget, you've also got that little quiz that you're supposed to do for Angelina College on your blackboard. It's not very long, it's pretty easy. It's not a grade for me, it's just something AC wants you to do, okay? So make sure y'all go do that when you get a chance. Sometime this week. I think most of you have already done it. Anyone still writing? All right, the next one I want to talk to you about is Delaware. Delaware is also a late starter in the colonial period. Delaware is a neighbor of Pennsylvania, and it's named in honor of Lord Delaware. This is him. Y'all remember him from when we were studying the Virginia colony, Jamestown, and the rest of Virginia. Lord Delaware was that military governor who used the harsh policies to repudiate the Indians. He's the guy that just wholesale slaughters Indians. Well, I say Delaware is named after him. Delaware is actually named after the Delaware Indians, but the Delaware Indians are named after Lord Delaware. So it's kind of an indirect thing. Delaware is also closely associated with Penn's colony. It starts off as part of Pennsylvania. It's just a series of separate counties in Pennsylvania. But eventually the population of Delaware gets to be so large that in 1703, the Penn colony allows it to establish its own assembly. So it gets to establish its own government instead of having to go all the way into Philadelphia to do everything. Now, while it has its own assembly and it's kind of making its own laws, it's still under the dominance of Pennsylvania all the way up until the American Revolution. So Pennsylvania is going to kind of treat it like its own little stepchild for a while there until the American Revolution. And then Delaware is going to kind of come onto its own. In fact, Delaware is going to very strongly come onto its own. The delegates from Delaware are going to be among the strongest supporters of independence. Shockingly so, in fact. The large German population that is there is going to be very, very pro-independence. Okay, y'all still writing? Looks like you got it. And we're going through these quick today. The next ones are the Carolinas. The Carolinas are named after King Charles. Now, I know you're all sitting here saying, no, it's not. If it was named after King Charles, it would be like Charlesville or something. But Carolinas is the Latin way of saying Charles, okay? So, they kind of name it with a kind of romantic name. The Carolinas have a unique history from all the rest of the colonies. And that's that their colonists did not come directly from England. The Carolinas were established as kind of a way station colony for the more successful West Indian colonies. The British were very, very proud of their West Indian colonies because they were sugar colonies and they were making England a lot of money. Well, as the sugar barons bought up more and more land in the West Indies, they started squeezing out some of the smaller farmers. And these smaller farmers, a lot of them end up coming and settling in the Carolinas. Why is that important? Well, they're going to bring a type of society with them that was unique to the to the Spice Islands, that were unique to this area. They brought a slave code that was the harshest slave code in the world. They brought slavery with them. They established sugar plantations. They established these very, very strict rules. Now, they had to have those rules in the West Indies because the slaves so outnumbered the whites that they had to have these very strict rules to control them. In the Carolinas, it was a crime to teach a slave to read or write. Later on, that's going to be a crime in Virginia and other places as well. It was also a crime for blacks to gather in groups of 3 or more because they're very worried about them being able to organize. And they're always worried about a slave revolt. And slave revolts have happened, okay? So they're pretty concerned about it. This is the model that's going to come with it. So, what was the hope of Carolina? Initially, at least, again, the Carolinas were to be a way station. They were supposed to be there as a food source for Barbados. They were supposed to be a place where Barbados could sell their product. They were supposed to be a place to export things like silk and wine. I don't know why we keep trying to do silk. Silk does not work in North America, but we kept trying. We tried olives in the Carolinas. They don't work either. They need a Mediterranean climate. So we tried all of this. But what does work in the Carolinas is a plantation-style economy. And the big crop was rice and indigo in the Carolinas. Rice and indigo was the gold and silver of the Carolinas. Super important. And rice is going to be important because, well, you need people that know how to grow rice. And you know where rice grows real well? Africa. So they brought that with them, okay? I was going to say the underlined parts are the most important, but I looked up there and realized it's almost all underlined. So, you know, just make sure you get this written down. This is a big one. I'll give you a minute to get it all. Y'all just about got it? Looks like everybody's done. So this is the area that we call the Lower South. When we talk about the colonies, the Lower South are the Carolinas and Georgia. The Upper South is Maryland and Virginia, okay? The Lower South is going to be settled with a little different kinds of people. When they first showed up in the Carolinas, they did attempt to enslave the local Indians. That was their first attempt. It wasn't they didn't originally plan on using black slaves, but that's what they knew. They enslaved the local Savannah Indians. But the Savannah Indians had no tolerance for malaria. And if you're going to grow rice, I don't know if y'all know how to grow rice, but you flood your fields with it, and you're going to have mosquitoes. You're going to have lots of mosquitoes anywhere there's rice because you've got flooded fields. And mosquitoes are vectors for malaria. Since the Indians had no tolerance to it, they were dying just in mass amounts. So what's the solution? Well, they bought what they called conditioned slaves. These were slaves that had long been working in the sugar and rice fields in Barbados, and they've got an immunity to it. So they would go get slaves that were already immune to this. They didn't understand immunity. What they understood was if you got somebody that had survived a similar condition, they'll survive it here too. So they end up turning to black slaves. In 1707, this to me is one of the low places. 1707, the Savannah Indians agree to leave the Carolinas. They say, fine, we'll go to Pennsylvania where we're allowed to live freely. Pennsylvania had agreed to accept them. They packed up and they started moving out of the state. All Carolina has to do is allow them to leave. But instead, they decide that they need to thin it first. And they go through and attack the Savannah villages before they get a chance to leave. Really, as extermination. They are thinning the number of Indians. Just like you thin a herd of cattle that you're not happy with, or whatever you're doing here, if you're thinning a crop. They decided to thin the Indians. A very, very racist policy. In fact, it's extermination. By 1710, the 3-year raids are done, and most of the Savannah Indians have been exterminated. In 3 years, they almost completely wiped out a whole Indian nation. Just because they could. I'll tell you one thing history does teach you. The good old days might not have been so good. We live in the best time period ever right now. I spent so much of my life in the past, I sometimes think I would rather be living in the past. And I look around at what was going on in the past and go, never mind. I think I'll stay here. Y'all got it? You don't have to write this one down. I kind of addressed it, but it won't be in your test. The most important city in South Carolina is Charlestown, named after King Charles. It's still there. It's Charleston now, okay? But Charleston, South Carolina started off as Charlestown. And it was a massive port. Excuse me. I don't know which one of you I'm allergic to. But I only sneeze in this class. It's probably stabbing dwarf there. A very religiously tolerant place. So the English are going to be quite happy coming and living in Charleston, because it didn't matter what religion you were, you could kind of practice your faith. I've kind of already talked about this. You know me, I get out of order while I'm doing this stuff. But the big crop here is rice. Rice was still considered an exotic food at this time. I can't imagine anything less exotic than rice now. When I was a young, poor college student, I lived off beans and rice. It's what I could afford. Well, that just wasn't true then. Rice was something new. That's what a wild rice plant looks like, by the way. Rice is going to take over so much that the imported black slaves that knew how to grow it, because it was from Africa, are going to be a majority in the Carolinas by 1710. By the way, rice is still a pretty big crop in the Carolinas. Not as big as it is in Louisiana or Florida, but still pretty big. Or down around Houston, there's still a lot of rice growing. The problem with doing this for 20 years is I end up telling the stories ahead of the slides because I know what's coming next. You got it? The other big crop is indigo. You can shorten this, it's not a big deal. All you need to know about indigo is that its main use was as a blue dye. That was a color that was very valuable at that time. Remember, purple is the color of royalty, okay? Can't have purple without indigo. So indigo is going to be an incredibly important crop. Still is, although not nearly as important as it used to be. Main use of indigo today is it colors your blue jeans. But pretty important crop in the 1700s. And really all the way up into the 1900s. Shouldn't take you long to get that main idea down for this one. Okay? All right, so the Carolinas become a very wealthy colony. And here's the problem, is immediately south of Carolina, there's kind of a no man's land, and then you have Spanish Florida. And Spain and England haven't gotten along since the days of Queen Elizabeth, okay? Since Elizabeth turned down Philip for marriage, they've hated each other. Plus, let's remember that Spain is the greatest of the Catholic nations, and England is the most powerful of the Protestant nations. And Spanish Spain, Spanish Florida, does not like the concept of a mountain load of Protestants gathering on its border. So we're going to have some Anglo-Spanish wars in this time period. The Spanish are going to conduct border raids. What this means is they're going to raid across into the Carolinas, attack, and then escape back to the safety of Spanish Florida. In most cases, they were proxy battles. What that means is the Spanish were not doing it themselves. Sometimes they were, but usually they were giving guns to the local Indian tribes and inciting them to go attack. So they were trying to foment rebellion in the Carolinas. They were trying to scare the British away. It did not work. By 1700, the Carolina colony is large enough and powerful enough that Spanish Florida is no longer really a threat to them. Now, they can still make their raids. They can still make their skirmishes in and burn some towns and do some damage. But Spain cannot conquer the Carolinas. That hope is done by this point. Spanish Florida is much less populated than English Carolina. Okay? That having been said, the English still need to protect their valuable Carolina colonies. So what do you do if you want to protect a colony from something else? Well, you put something between you and your enemy. You need a wall or a border or something to that effect. Think about Donald Trump. Need a wall, right? Well, they needed a wall in Carolina. Okay, they needed something to protect them. Keep that in mind. They're struggling with this idea of how do we protect our southern border. In the meantime, the Carolinas begin to separate their interests a little bit. People in the Carolinas started thinking themselves as North Carolinians and South Carolinians. And the two are vastly different. They still are vastly different today. I used to live in North Carolina. And I remember going to South Carolina. If you go to South Carolina, the people are a very genteel people. It feels like the Deep South. You know, it's Gone with the Wind and Tara, beautiful southern cities. And this is South Carolina. You go to North Carolina, it's redneck village all the time. It's NASCAR and basketball, okay? It's something different in North Carolina. And I think it's always been that way. And it's because of the kind of people that settled there. North Carolina shares a border with Virginia. So what ends up happening is the people that can't or that are not succeeding in Virginia are pushed down south, and they end up coming into what's North Carolina. It's all the cast-outs. It's all the roustabouts, your dissenters. And a lot of them are religious dissenters and not super big, super devout religious people to begin with. South Carolina, though, they're going to be very religious. They're going to be very upscale. So you can see where these two are not going to be able to get along. North Carolina ends up becoming famous as a safe haven for piracy. Now I know you're all sitting here thinking, pirates? Really? Like Johnny Depp? Yes, like Johnny Depp. These guys, these pirates, would come into places like Cape Fear in North Carolina, out of Wilmington. And these North Carolina towns would protect the pirates because they would go off and they would rob places and they would rob ships, but then they would come back into North Carolina and they'd spend their money there, and that kind of fueled the economy, so they protected them. There's a strong spirit of resistance to authority in North Carolina. Still today, a strong spirit of resistance to authority. And it goes back to this time period. Think about it. Y'all know why NASCAR got its start in North Carolina?
Street racing.
Well, it didn't start off as street racing. Well, sort of it did. The original cars were started off as liquor running cars. They souped these cars up to run alcohol and outrun the police during Prohibition. Well, when Prohibition ends, right there in North Carolina, all these people that had all these souped up cars, suddenly they had no use for them, so they started racing with NASCAR. That's how it grew out. Well, that shows you what kind of people we have in that area. They're very resistant to authority. Okay. 1712, North Carolina officially separates and has made its own colony. So it's not just the Carolinas, it's North Carolina and South Carolina after 1712. Last colony we have found is Georgia. I lived in Georgia for a while too. It's also a pretty interesting colony. Georgia is that border that the Carolinas needed. Remember I said they needed a wall, they needed something there to stop the Spanish from attacking their valuable Carolina colonies. Well, Georgia's going to be that buffer. We're going to let Georgia catch the bullets. If they want to attack something, let them attack Georgia. And you can see in that map where there's blue and beige lines. That's parts that were claimed by English Georgia and Spanish Florida. So you can see there's going to be some issues. It's, again, the last colony. It's founded as a proprietary colony. That means a colony owned by one person. And that person was James Oglethorpe. James Oglethorpe doesn't found Georgia until 1733. And he had a brilliant idea. He was going to go to China, get silkworms, bring them to America, and raise silkworms in Georgia so he could make silk and they could bypass the valuable Silk Road trade. And instead of giving the money to China, because everybody wanted silk at this time, they could just give it to him. It's a pretty smart move. And he looked at a map and he went, Georgia's on about the same line of latitude as the area in China that the silkworms are from. So logically, if silkworms will grow at this latitude here, they'll grow at this latitude here. That makes sense. If your elevation is about the same and your latitude is about the same, you should have the same climate. The problem is, he loaded this ship up with silkworms in China, and he started shipping them. And they have to go down south around the tip of Africa, the Strait of Magellan. The problem is, if you get down there in that southern tip, it is very, very cold. You're near Antarctica. All the silkworms die. So this shipload of dead worms shows up in Georgia, and what do? He's about bankrupt. So James Oglethorpe contacts his buddy the king, and he says, can you help me? What can you do? And the king sees a solution to his problem. His solution is, I will empty out my prison. I will empty out my debt prisons in Georgia. So what he did is he actually went to these prisons that he had, where in England they had debt prisons. If you owed money, they would throw you in prison until your family could pay their debt off. And he told these people, you can go to America and get your debt forgiven, or you can stay in prison. Well, they went to America. As a result, you end up with a high class of people that are highly in debt in Georgia. Why would the king do this? Why would he support it? Well, again, it empties out his prisons, but it also provides that important buffer to protect the Carolina colonies. They were really trying to keep slavery out of Georgia. It just doesn't work. By 1750, slavery is is everywhere in Georgia. And eventually Georgia's going to have more slaves than any other state. Georgia was a failed attempt. I looked it up a few years ago, and I don't know if it's still true, but when I looked it up several years ago in the World Almanac, Georgia still had a higher debt per citizen than any other state in the United States did. And it kind of makes sense, generational debt. Poverty seems to be generational, unfortunately. Y'all still ready? All right, so the most important city in this colony is Savannah. If you ever get to go. It's a beautiful place. It's a port city. Now, any type of Christianity could have religious freedom here except Catholics. They still do not recognize Catholicism as a legitimate religion. Missionaries are here very, very early. One of the most famous one was a young John Wesley. You don't know who John Wesley is? He's one of the founders of the Methodist Church. Okay? Right here in Savannah. One of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to in my life. Ever get a chance to go to Savannah, it's worth it. Got it? All right. So we are through with this lecture. Remember, we have a test in 1 week, next Wednesday. No class next Monday. If you're stuck on something, feel free to email me, text me, whatever. I will be glad to help you. I'll be around all week and all weekend. So just send me a message. I want everybody to get 100. This is too easy of a test not to. You know exactly, word for word, what will be on the test, okay? You're going to have about 30 terms. You're going to choose 25 of them. I'll probably put 3 essays and you'll choose 2 of them, okay? But be prepared for everything because you don't know what terms I'm going to pick and you don't know what essays I'm going to pick, okay?
Have you picked them?
I have not done it yet, so I don't even know yet. I won't do it till the last minute. So, but you all know what the question banks are. I'm not changing it. It will all come word for word off your study guide, okay? All right. See you guys later.